in society around us, and the people that you meet at school, and most of the people that you'll ever work with, and most of the people you'll probably meet in our Western society, they will have a different worldview to you. So most people around us are what we call humanists. What they believe in is humans. Okay? And obviously, we are Bible believers. So obviously, we believe in God. And what happens with humanists is they have a very kind of strange view of things. Obviously, they don't believe in God. What do they believe? Well, if we would say to the average humanist on the street, we grabbed him and brought him in, and we'd say, who are you? And they'd say, I'm a highly evolved animal. That's how they see themselves, as a beast. Where did you come from? Well, I think I came from a big bang, which happened by pure chance, billions of years ago. Why are you here? I have no idea. I just am here. There's no reason, so I might as well go to all the parties I can, have great fun, and not worry about any restraints that are put on me unless they're inconvenient to me. There's no other obligations than that. So what hope is there for you after your death? None. I'm just going to die, and that's going to be the end. I really wouldn't start writing all this down. There's a lot of material, so you're going to get. I can make these slides. I can make these slides available to everybody afterwards as well. So when we come to us, though, in terms of our beginnings as human beings, we turn up our Bibles and it says, "In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth." Okay? So we believe in a creator, don't we? We believe there's a God, and if there's a creator and He's created everything, it goes without saying that there's a purpose behind it. So mostly, if you were to take one of the uncles and aunties in a meeting and you were to say, right, well, who are you? And they'd say, well, I'm someone who's been called to be enlightened by God's truth. I've been called by the creator of the heaven and earth to know Him. I'm in a very special position in that sense. There's a lot of responsibility that comes with that, but it's a blessing. Where did you come from? Well, I was created by God. That's where humankind was created, and God even, had knew of me before I was even born. It says, doesn't it, in our Bibles? Why am I here? I'm here to strive to serve God and please Him. That's my purpose. That should be our purpose as we live our lives. If we truly believe in God, we wish to please Him. And what hope is there after death? Well, obviously, as Christadelphians, we believe in a resurrection and a place in God's coming kingdom. So they're very different worldviews, aren't they, in terms of how things happen and who people are. And one of the key things that's happened over time, why is it that this creationist worldview, which was in our society, in English society, particularly when the Bible was translated into English in the King James Version, everybody sort of was a creationist. Everybody believed that God had created them. But then suddenly something happened, didn't it, back in time? And it is supposed to have come from science. But let's just clarify a couple of phrases before we start using them. The definition of the word science from Collins English Dictionary, okay? Science, the systematic study of the nature and behaviour of the material and physical universe based on observation, experiment and measurement, and the formulation of laws to describe these facts in general terms. Now the key phrase I want you to really kind of point out here is based on observation, right? Science is something you can observe. The actual, when you go back into the kind of the root word of what science means, it means knowledge, okay? So it's something you know. Why? Because you have observed it. You know that. So I know you're there, Tom, because I can see you, right? I observe you. That's science. That's knowledge in my brain. You are there. I am sure Tom is there. I could soon punch him in the nose, and I'm sure he'd soon know I'm here as well. So that is science. So everyone can agree with that. I believe in science. I believe in stuff that I can observe and is tangible. Okay, and so on that basis, I have no problem with science. But the problem that we've got is in society around us. Okay, they mix good stuff with bad stuff. So they take that idea of science, okay, and they've really changed the meaning of it. So instead of it being now something which you can observe and demonstrate, it now becomes some sort of religion, okay? So what they do is, and I'm going to show you this in a bit more, perhaps in a bit more detail, there are good bits of science that we're all happy with, but there are also bad bits of so-called science. And some of those bad bits are being taught to you guys as facts at school. And so I liken it to this thing, like lemonade. It's like everyone loves lemonade. If you came to lemonade and you saw a big poison sticker on it, you'd probably think twice about buying it from Tesco. So we're not against science. We're against the poison mixed in with science and taught as fact. That's what we're against. So let's have a couple more definitions for everybody, right? You guys would have probably heard this with Uncle Peter at Bible school, because I think I got his notes and I saw he dealt with this. But it's very good because it's important that we understand what actually is meant by evolution. Because people talk about it in very loose terms. So there's various meanings to evolution. And normally, when you're talking to people, they don't really know which bit of evolution they're talking about or which bit they actually believe in. So I'm going to just run through these very basically. Firstly, you've got cosmic evolution. Okay, and this is like where stuff came from, the origin of matter, the Big Bang. We'll look at that in a bit. Where nothing exploded and became everything. And that's cosmic evolution. It's kind of evolved from nothing. Then you've got chemical evolution, where the origin of elements kind of develop and produce an offspring, as it were. And so we get different elements in chemicals. You've then got stellar evolution, which is where scientists try and work out the origin of stars and planets. Organic evolution, the origin of life from non-living matter. Macroevolution, which is where scientists believe that one animal kind of came into another animal. So, like, the old story of blob of jelly became some sort of tadpole, which then became some sort of animal that crawled onto land, and then it became a giraffe. That's macroevolution. That's where one animal changes into another animal. One species completely redevelops into something completely different, another kind of organism. And then we've got, right at the end, microevolution. And we could kind of say that this is like variations within kinds. This is what they would call in your textbooks adaptation, right? So they'll look at, I don't know, a rose, and they'll go, oh, look, the rose is adapted to this particular environment. And we'll look at some examples of those in a minute. Now, of all of those, there are only 5 which can be observed and demonstrated as true science. That's annoying. There's supposed to be a line that comes across. And I had this happen before, didn't I? What did I do to fix this before? Did I... Is that even recording? I think it's now recording.
Ah, there we go. Now it's working. Okay, so as I say, there's these 6 parts of evolution, and the top 5, okay, they are non-observable. The only one which is observable is variations within kinds of animals. So if you've got a cat, you'll know there's different varieties of cat. If you keep chickens, you'll know there's different varieties of chickens. If you kept cows, there's different variety of cows, right? But the cow is always a cow. It's never going to change into a donkey. A chicken is always going to be a chicken. It might have a variation of a chicken, but it's never going to turn into a whale. Okay? So we can see variations around us. That is observable science. The rest is not observable. The rest requires faith, doesn't it? Because they have to believe that these things happened. They can't observe them from true science, from true knowledge. And so actually, in truth, what is happening in terms of the word evolution and the word science is this phrase here. It's a very long word. It's called equivocation. Okay? What's equivocation? Collins English Dictionary. A fallacy based on the use of the same term in different senses. So this is why it gets quite difficult when you're talking to people in the world, because they might say to you, do you believe in evolution? You have to say, well, hang on a second, what do you actually mean by that? Because I believe, personally, in variations amongst kinds. I believe in adaptation. I believe that God has made a creation that can adapt a little bit, but there are boundaries to that. But I do not believe that everything came from a blob of jelly on the beach 20 billion years ago, or however long ago they reckon it is. I do not believe that. So we have to make sure that we're using the right words. I believe in science. I believe in observable things that can be proved. I don't believe in the religion that goes with it. Equivocation.
In the last,
Do you want me to go back?
in different senses. Okay.
Okay. These slides will be available, Laura, so don't feel that you have to. I know you're very, very good at that. Weird, yeah. I didn't say that, I was Benji. Right, so we have here a very interesting letter from this professor, and he says, I have found that many of my scientific colleagues are very reluctant to acknowledge the existence of problems with evolutionary theory to the general public. They display an almost religious zeal for a strictly Darwinian view of biological origins. Charles Darwin was the one who wrote this book, The Origin of Species, which kind of kicked everything off. I'm sure you're all aware of that. For those scientists who take it seriously, Darwinian evolution has functioned more as a philosophical belief system than as a testable scientific hypothesis. This quasi-religious function of the theory is, I think, what lies behind many of the extreme statements that you have doubtless encountered from some scientists opposing any critical analysis of neo-Darwinism in the classroom. It is also why many scientists make public statements about the theory that they would not defend privately to other scientists like me. So that's a very interesting insight by a professor. And he's saying basically it's like a religion. It's like blind faith that they have in these first 5 parts because they're not observable. They are not true science. So what's happening is this bait and switch. Have you heard of the bait and switch technique? You say, hey, come over here, it's going to be wonderful. And then in reality, it's different. So you bait someone with something that they think it's going to be like, and in reality, there's something far more different behind it. So come and get some free cheese, you say to the mouse, and then before it knows it, it's got its neck snapped because it's got something else that it didn't realise was going to happen. And that's what's happening with the bait and switch, particularly in schools. They're saying to you guys, come and learn science. And there's so many good things about science, isn't there? Like Bunsen burners and all these things that you guys do. I love Bunsen burners. I love melting my pen in the top. I used to do that. Got banned from the science lab when I was a kid for doing that. It was great. I had a nice little twiddle on the end of my Bic pen. But yeah, I got in trouble for that. And I love all that. Yeah, sorry, Ruth. Yeah, scrub that bit from the tape. But, you know, these things happen, and they are great, and we love science for those reasons. But there's the other bit of science, the dark side of science, that you're going to come across, particularly if you're coming up to your GCSEs. So this is a book. I think this was one that Luke sent me. Let me just show you the bait and switch. I think it's very much, it's this one here. I bought, this is my one. I've got them here. So we've got evolution. Look at this. This is what this book says. This is what you have to learn. There are lots of different species around on Earth today, but there wasn't always so much variety. The theory of evolution, more than 3 billion years ago, life on Earth began as simple organisms from which all the more complex organisms evolved rather than just popping into existence. All organisms are related, even if only distantly. So what they do is they've taken an observable fact, true science, there are lots of different species around, and then they've made these ridiculous statements without giving you any evidence whatsoever. So what they're doing is they're mixing true science with pretend science. And you guys are going to have to keep an eye out for this. I mean, if a teacher stood up in class and said this, I would be like, please, miss, where's your evidence? Like, I've got evidence for lots of different species, but you are now making a statement without any evidence whatsoever. And I doubt they'll have been challenged like that before. And yeah, when they bring their evidence, you'll have to have a look at it.
I fell out with my science teachers.
Good. This is not science, but religion, you see. This is a belief. They've left true observable science, and they've gone into their fairy tale of their religion, which is that everything came from soup. And that is the truth. And why? Why is it that our society has really grabbed hold of some of these ideas? Well, look at this. This is the British Humanist Association for the One Life We Have. What humanists? They're people that believe in humans. They believe in God. They're atheists. They don't believe in God at all. And on their website, this is what they said. We aim to achieve a situation where humanism is understood as an ethical and fulfilling non-religious approach to life involving a naturalistic view of the universe. The UK is a secular state. This is what the situation they want to achieve. that the UK is a secular state guaranteeing human rights with no privilege or discrimination on grounds of religion or belief, and that public debate and policy are shaped by humanist perceptives. So that's what they want. They want everybody to not believe in God, and they want everybody to basically shape their views and public debates about around their humanist religion.
What do we about no privilege or discrimination on grounds of religious?
Well, I think that what they're saying there is they don't want anybody to hold a higher position in society because of the religion they have. And I imagine they're aiming... Yeah, it's hilarious. They basically hate it, but I think what they're getting at there is they don't want... there's bishops, isn't there, in the House of Lords, and I don't think they like that.
They're sort of saying, you're religious. We don't mind if you're religious, but just don't.
Yeah, just don't talk about it. Don't debate with us. What does the Bible say about this humanism? The fool hath said in his heart, there is no God. So how does God see the humanist society? A bunch of fools. That is the truth of it. How should we see humanists around us? As fools. We want to save them. We want to get them baptized. We want to bring them to the meeting so they learn the gospel. But the truth of the matter is a lot of the people out there, according to the Bible, are foolish. Okay? So we need to bear that in mind when we're going around listening to even our teachers at school. The fool hath said in his heart, there is no God. So that's a verse to bear in mind. Now look at this. This is where it gets very interesting and very dangerous. The Humanist Society again. Humanist Association, sorry. Over the course of the 21st century, the British Humanist Association has led the campaign in support of evolution being added to the primary national curriculum and in opposition to creationism being taught in state schools. In September 2011, the BHA coordinated the Teach Evolution, Not Creationism campaign. This campaign has been very successful. As a result of our efforts, evolution has been added to the draft primary national curriculum in England, while free schools now have to teach evolution but are precluded from teaching pseudoscience. Now, the point is here, there's a lot of long words there, but the point is they've said, we're humanists, we don't believe in God, we want to teach evolution. And that has now come in. So we know Uncle Simon and Uncle Mark in our meeting have been very against this, have been actively involved in trying to warn the Brotherhood about it. And so now in year 6, what's that? That's age 10, isn't it? That's age 10, is that about right? 10, 11? They have to learn this. Why is the British Humanist Society so interested in that? Richard Dawkins said, my personal feeling is that understanding evolution led me to atheism. In other words, they want everyone to become atheists and humanists like them. That's their religion. So that's why they're pushing it. And so this is what's been pushed through. It's now not, I don't think it's even in the draft now, it's in the real one that started in September. What year are you in, Annie? 7. What year are you in? 6. So you may have just escaped this, but this is what's coming up for the next generation. Peter in our meeting, he'll be learning all this stuff, and people like him. So pupils should be taught to, and notice what they're doing again, they're mixing humanist ideology with true science. They should recognise that living things have changed over time and that fossils provide information about living things that inhabited the earth millions of years ago. No evidence whatsoever. Recognise that living things produce offspring of the same kind, true, but normally offspring vary and are not identical to their parents. Identify how animals and plants are adapted to suit their environment in different ways, and that adaptation may lead to evolution. That's what the kids are going to have to be taught. They have to come out of their lessons recognising those things. And if the teacher doesn't done that, then the teacher is rubbish. So this is the problem that we've got in our society. The people we're preaching to, the people we're talking to, they've taken these things and they obviously believe them as fact. But what does the theory of evolution actually say about origins? What actual evidence is there? And how does it work? So let me just explain to everybody, because I think it's worth just clarifying this. And then we'll look at some of the so-called evidence for all of this stuff as best as I can. Now, obviously, as you all know, I'm not a scientist, right? So I do not pretend to be like some sort of intelligent person in regards to this. I've just read up quite a lot of books about it. If I've got anything wrong, I apologise, and I'm more than happy to take anything out if anyone finds it's completely incorrect. And I'm also happy to discuss anything if someone wants to go through anything. But here's the timeline. Let me just finish this first of all. This is what the evolutionist believes, okay? So this varies. They're not sure exactly when this Big Bang thing happened, right? Some people say, 13 billion years ago. Some say 20. So I put the biggest one on because, it's more extreme. So I pop that in. And then what they believe is over time, so the Big Bang happened, kaboom, nothing exploded and became everything. And then the Earth was floating around like a rock. And then there was kind of water and rain and lightning and stuff. And the rain rained on the rock. And then it became soup. And then the soup came alive. And then man formed out of the soup eventually. So basically, primordial soup. That's what they believe. So basically what they believe, in effect, is great granddad was soup. That's what they believe. And even before that, he was a bit of rock, because the minerals had to come out of the rock to make the soup, to make Grandad. And before that, he was nothing. Proteins, there you go. We're going to talk about proteins in our 4th or 5th session. We're going to love it. So yeah, so that's that. So that's quite different, isn't it, to the biblical timeline? Because if you get your Bible out and you do a bit of study, you can work out through the genealogies in Genesis. Me and Auntie Ruth did this on our holiday when we went to Norfolk the other week. We had a very exciting holiday. We stayed up one night and we worked it all out. You can actually find near enough, within probably 2 or 3 years, the year that the flood occurred. And you can work out the general genealogy, and I'm going to show you this later, that around 6,000 years ago, God created the heavens and the earth. And then around 4,400 years ago, there was a worldwide cataclysmic flood that destroyed everything. And then 2,000 years ago, there was Jesus, and then there's us. So that's very, very different, isn't it, in terms of time. This one is obviously not to scale. The two are not to scale. This would be ridiculously long, the top line, if I was trying to do it to scale. And what it is the evolutionist needs billions of years in order to justify his belief, because he can't observe it now. So the explanation is, it must have taken a long time.
They used to say it was a lot longer. Sure, they said it's like
It keeps increasing.
Yeah, but they realised there had to be more chance. Yeah, more years.
Basically, yeah, whenever they think, it's not really going to work, they think, okay, what's our solution? Well, let's add a few billion years. Oh, yeah, that more now makes sense. So that's what they do. Anyway, this is Bite Size. Who recommended Bite Size? Was it you, Luke? I said to Luke, Luke, where do they tell you to go to get all your knowledge from for your GCSEs? Luke said, go to Bite Size. And is that right? Is that where you're all being told to go to? It is rubbish, but check out what it's teaching all the little kids. The theory of the Big Bang. The theory states that originally all the matter in the universe was concentrated into a single, incredibly tiny point. Wow. This began to enlarge rapidly in a hot explosion and is still expanding today. The explosion is called the Big Bang and happened about 13.7 billion years ago. Wonderful. So that's the religion of the Big Bang. You have to have faith. Was anyone there? Were they there? Did they see this happen? No. Were we there at creation? No. But we've got an eyewitness account in our Bibles. So, let's be serious. The Big Bang idea. Here's nothing. There was nothing. Kwaboom. And there's everything.
How did the Bang?
Wow. Well, this is the question. It actually defies all scientific observable evidence.
Energy.
Exactly, and we're going to come on to that in a minute. But basically, it all came from nothing. Now, isn't that great? By chance, by the way. Completely chance. So, as I say, Earth became a rock floating around the universe, and then rain and lightning happened upon it over billions of years, and as if by magic, soup came around. And then, after the soup, came man. And what happens is the way that they believe that it works is that the soup grew into a tree, right? So this is how they illustrate it. So you've probably seen these. Is it called homeology? where they look at they try and work out the origins of everything. What they say is like, these are living things at the top of the tree, and they branched off from ancient ancestors who branched off from other ancient ancestors, and some of them died along the way and were extinct, but others have carried on until today. And that's where we get this they get this idea of the tree of life, started by Charles Darwin. And this is what he said in his book, which I've got here. He said, "As many more individuals of each species are born than can possibly survive, and as consequently there is a frequently reoccurring struggle for existence, it follows that any being, if it vary, however slightly, in any manner profitable to itself, under the complex and sometimes varying conditions of life, will have a better chance of surviving, and thus be naturally selected. From the strong principle of inheritance, any selected variety will tend to propagate its new and modified form." Now, who was Charles Darwin? He was a British naturalist, wasn't he? I think he was actually, he used to be a Christian, and he went on this boat called the Beagle, and he was going around collecting bugs, I think, from the Galapagos Islands. And he happened to be observing various things, and he observed all these finches. There were lots of different varieties, and he came back and he developed this theory that, wow, why are all these different varieties? Maybe if there's one variety that's has bigger beak, it'll be more beneficial to that species, and the other ones might die out, and that one might survive. And so maybe that's how life kind of adapted and grew over time. It was naturally selected. Isn't that wonderful? There's a massive problem with natural selection, and I'm going to come on to that in a minute. This is what's hilarious. Why did that idea become so popular? Well, this is in that science book that Luke sent me. Not everyone agreed with Darwin, it says. Oh, the silly people. How could they not agree with Darwin? Why did these stupid people not agree with Darwin? It went against common religious belief about how life on Earth developed. It was the first plausible explanation for our own existence without the need of a creator God. That's in the science books. They're actually saying the silly people, they resisted Darwin's ideas because it went against the fact that there was a God. And so now, of course, we don't believe there is a God, so what's the point in even examining, from a logical scientific perspective, whether Charles Darwin had anything tangible to say? So he coined these phrases, didn't he? Natural selection, the survival of the fittest. And we read in our science book, the genes that are responsible for the useful characteristics are more likely to be passed on to the next generation. Now, natural selection is a crazy kind of concept to illustrate the origins of life, right? Because let's just say I had a car park, right? We went into Sainsbury's and there was a big car park, and we said, right, we are going to naturally select all the red cars, right? And all the other cars we're going to burn. So we move all the other cars out the way, and we burn them, they're all gone, and now we've got a load of red cars left. And then we said, well, out of the red cars, we're going to separate all the bright red cars from the dark red cars. I'm going to burn all the dark red cars. So we do that. And that is how they view natural selection, that it selects. But those red cars didn't change into anything, did they? The car, it's a selection from stuff that's already there, and already in an environment. So on its own, natural selection does not do a good job of saying where life came from. And in essence, personally, I'm not actually that against natural selection, selecting from life that already exists. It can happen. There's no doubt about that. But it does not explain how new life and new form and new variations and new kinds come into being. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit. And really, Charles Darwin kind of slightly admits some of this stuff in his book. To suppose that the eye, with all its immutable contrivances for adjusting the focus to different distances, for admitting different amounts of light, and for the correction of spherical and chromatic aberration, could have been formed by natural selection seems, I freely confess, absurd in the highest degree. Yes, Charlie, it is absurd to the highest degree. It doesn't explain, his theory does not explain how new things came about. So, two other people come on the scene. Jean-Baptiste Lamarck. He said, well, hey, what happens is this. Natural selection happens, but what happens is like giraffes, right? They stretch, and so Daddy Giraffe, he stretches up to get leaves. And his neck grows a tiny little bit higher. And then he has a baby. Baby's neck is the same little bit higher. And then baby grows up to be a daddy, and he stretches his neck. And then his neck gets a little bit higher, and then next baby. And before you know it, you've got a giraffe. And that's what was his idea. Basically, sorry, we'll talk about this in a minute. Basically, that you inherited some acquired characteristics which you could almost determine in your lifetime from your parents. But then this guy came along, Gregor Johann Mendel. And Gregor said, no. This is not true. It doesn't. You can't develop new kind of things, new genetic information within a kind. So he did a lot of study. I think it was on sweet peas, and he propagated tons and tons of stuff and mucked around with them loads. And he found that actually, if you get a variety of sweet peas, I think it was like a variety that was purple, right? He found that you could make the purple go less of a colour, so it could go back to white basically, but he couldn't make it change to orange, right? It just wasn't doable in this particular study that he was doing. And so from my understanding, that's kind of how he proved scientifically that you can't add new genetic information to stuff. The information is there, right? You can get degradations of that. You can get variations within a pre-set plan, but you cannot get new stuff. So Gregor told Jean he was wrong. And he was a monk, yes. So, there you go. He liked sweet peas. A monk who liked sweet peas.
A lot of time to waste.
He had a lot of time to waste, yeah. But probably, yeah, anyway, we can talk about Catholic monks later. That's another story altogether. So who sent me this one? I think this was Alex, actually. Alex sent this in, and this is now what they're teaching about evolution, right? So they say, they didn't say, suddenly, our theories are wrong. They looked for another explanation. And the other explanation that popped up was this idea of mutations. Okay, so let's just read this quickly. The theory of evolution. Animals and plants that are better adapted to their environment are more likely to survive. This theory is called natural selection and was first put forward by Charles Darwin. Evolution is the slow, continual change of organisms over a very long period, billions of years, to become better adapted to their environment. These changes arise, and look at this, through mutations. They couldn't have it so that it was a natural thing that occurred anymore. It had to be just sporadic, by chance mutations in DNA. And what they did is they discovered that when mutations do occur in DNA, like maybe something gets broken or something in a DNA and then you have children, that those mutations actually carry on so it's an inherited thing. So they're like, hey, this must be how everybody grew legs and fingers and arms. It's a bit of a stretch. This is what they say. These adaptations are controlled by genes and can be passed on to future generations. If the environment changes, species must change with it. They are to survive. If they are to survive. Animals and plants that are better adapted to their environment are more likely to survive. This is called natural selection. Species that aren't well adapted to their environment may become extinct. Yes, evolution is a religion of death. Everything has to die if it's not good enough. If you're not good enough, you are worthy of death in evolutionary thinking. And you see how they've had to adapt the theory now. They've had to make mutations, and that added tons more time on. And this idea of the mutations is called, in science, neo-Darwin. Okay? So this is neo-Darwinism. Let's move on. How does it happen? Mutation, says the textbook. And I love this bit, right at the bottom. Okay? Natural selection. The fittest pass on their characteristics. Natural selection's all about the organisms with the best characteristics surviving to pass on their genes so that the whole species ends up adapted to its environment. And look at this. It doesn't happen overnight, though. That's a bit strange, isn't it? I thought evolution happened in the daytime and the nighttime. How peculiar. It doesn't happen overnight. No, you're absolutely right. It doesn't happen at all. Not to the degree that they're suggesting it does. But we'll come on to that in a minute. Here's some professors. I mean, who cares what Uncle Matt says, right? What about some professors? Genetics might be adequate for explaining microevolution. That's what we believe in, observable variations within kinds. But microevolutionary changes in gene frequency were not seen as able to turn a reptile into a mammal or to convert a fish into an amphibian. Microevolution looks at adaptations that concern the survival of the fittest, not the arrival of the fittest. The origin of species, Darwin's problem, remains unsolved. And that's what I was saying. Natural selection selects from what's already there. It doesn't explain how that stuff got there in the first place. And mutations are really quite a weak argument, even scientifically, in regard to that. Natural selection, says this lady, Lynn Margolis, who's a biologist. She says, natural selection eliminates and maybe maintains, but it doesn't create. Neo-Darwinists, people who believe in mutations, say that new species emerge when mutations occur and modify an organism. I was taught over and over again that the accumulation of random mutations led to evolutionary change, which led to new species. I believed it until I looked for evidence. There is no evidence for it. And there's so much non-evidence that you find little groups popping up all over the place, right? This one is a scientific dissent from Darwinism. And you can look at that website, dissentfromdarwinism.org, right? And on that site, you'll find over 600 signatures of scientists, and they can only sign it, this particular statement, if you see here, if they're very high up, they have lots and lots of education and letters after their name. And this is what all these 600 people have signed. We are skeptical of claims for the ability of random mutation and natural selection to account for the complexity of life. Careful examination of the evidence of Darwinian theory should be encouraged. So, that's quite a good argument, I think. Scientists, some of them, have broken out of their shells and have indeed said that actually science itself, evolution itself, doesn't actually happen in that way. So you get the fairy tale of evolution. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, over billions of years, the frog can become your prince. And that is the magic ingredient. Billions of years. But now we're going to talk about something a little bit serious. Because let's say, okay, fine. Darwin was right, survival of the fittest. Then it's natural to then think, okay, amongst humanity, which of us is the most advanced race? And that's what Hitler did. And Hitler said, the Germans are. Blonde hair, blue eyes. These guys are amazing. They are the Aryan race. They are superior to all other races. The lowest ones are the Jews. They're bad. We've got to get rid of them. Survival of the fittest. They're competing for our stuff. Let's kill them. And basically, that's the blunt and obviously paraphrased view of what Nazis put forward. This is somebody who wrote about this, Richard Wyatt. Darwinism by itself did not produce the Holocaust, but without Darwinism, neither Hitler nor his Nazi followers would have had the necessary scientific underpinnings to convince themselves and their collaborators that one of the world's greatest atrocities was really morally praiseworthy. So it's a dangerous idea, this idea. Survival of the fittest. There's one loaf of bread left in the supermarket. There's you and some old woman. You're fitter than her. You should get that bread. Survival of the fittest. Too bad. Not love thy neighbour. Survival of the fittest, love. See ya. Thanks for the bread. And that's the thing. It takes morals out of the question. This is what this other guy, a pathologist, said. From Mexico. He says, I am absolutely convinced of the lack of true scientific evidence in favour of Darwinian dogma. Nobody in the biological sciences, medicine included, needs Darwinism at all. Darwinism is certainly needed, however, in order to pose as a philosopher, since it is primarily a worldview, and an awful one, as George Barnard Shaw used to say. So what he's saying there is, if you want to go into science, young people, right, there's nothing wrong with going into science, okay? I've got no problem. If you want, your dad's, into medical science, isn't he? Into backs and fixing people's backs. Now, you don't actually have to believe in evolution to fix somebody, do you, in terms of biology? There's you can deal with a situation, you can test something with true science, observable science, and still maintain a belief in the Bible. And that's what I want to show you later today, God willing. But the key thing, boys and girls, the key thing is that if you believe in evolution as your worldview, the key thing for you is it's an explanation, isn't it, to explain how everything came about without an almighty creator God. There's no need for you to obey anybody's rules. You don't have to care because there is no God. You can just do whatever you want. And so that's why we're seeing the humanist society and associations going wild with campaigns like this. You might have heard about this one before. You know, they put this on buses. There's probably no God. Now stop worrying and enjoy your life. You see, it's all about you. It's all about your life. It's all about humans. It's not about God. It's not about anyone else. It's me, me, me. But it's really a question of interpretation. Okay? So there's true facts that come around. For example, there are fossils of dinosaurs. That's a fact, isn't it? The evolutionist looks at that fact and they'll say, well, these were formed billions of years ago. Great. The creationist looks at that and says, these were formed 4,000 years ago by the flood. Okay? The fact remains the same, but the interpretation is different. There's another one. There are variations within kinds of animals. We've seen that from the textbooks. And we've seen the textbooks say, well, this shows that life developed from soup. But obviously, creationists would look at that and say, this shows flexibility in God's design. And as a general rule, the reason for why the things are so different is that the facts are interpreted mainly based on people's worldview. So if you happen to believe that there is no God, or you don't want to choose to believe there is a God, then you look for another explanation, and then every time you come across a fact, you'll try and find something to base your worldview on. So now I just want to spend a bit of time on the questionable evidence. Before I move on, in terms of that, does anyone have anything to add or any questions that they want to pose?
Yeah.
All make sense? Or?
You know, it is something interesting. You know what you said about how you believe that you grew a characteristic in your life and then that passed on to your kids. And obviously that's something a bit rubbish. But my dad was telling me quite a while ago. But they found this thing that you can have because he is interested in genes and genetics, delivery eyes.
Like Levi's.
Wait, what?
Like Levi's. Move on.
Okay. And apparently you can have genes, but they can be switched off, and then you can switch on genes in your life, and they can be passed on. So that could be sort of similar to what it might.
Yeah, that is something that's just coming out from scientific evidence now, isn't it? About turning genes on and off. So the gene is there, the thing is there, the colour of the flower is there, but it just turns on or turns off. But it doesn't mean you can add another colour, another thing to that gene. They call it a gene pool, don't they? So no, you're absolutely right there. And obviously what you've got to bear in mind is when things reproduce, then you get a mixing of the parent's genes, don't you? But that doesn't mean that anything new is added. It just means that those genes come together from each parent. So this is the thing. So let's talk about the questionable evidence. Sciences, most affected by evolution. Right? I'm going to try and whiz through these. Cosmology, astronomy, earth sciences and geology and biology. So bear with us. What time is it, by the way?
22.
Great, okay. Now, as we've been sort of hinting at, and I'm going to come back to this again and again and again, because this is the key question. This is the question to ask all your teachers, to ask all your friends. How can everything come from nothing? You can't observe that. You've got to have faith in something to have that happen. It's not like anyone has ever seen anything come from nothing before, because everything's already here. So how is that? So, for example, when we come to astrology, they'll look out at the Earth's sky. So this is basically, just to let you know, this section is a bit of research that I've done, and it's the stuff that I think is actually the best arguments that evolutionists might have. And then I'm trying to give some sort of other explanation to what's observed. So just to give you guys some sort of framework, just some sort of ideas, so that if someone comes at you with some of this stuff, perhaps you'll remember a little argument or a little thought, and then go away and do more deeper research into it if you need convincing yourselves. So the evolutionists, they look out from the Earth. Bear in mind, they can't really leave the Earth very easily. The Hubble telescope's probably the best thing, and it's just around the Earth. and look out at the universe, and they find a tiny bit of the universe, and they say, we see the stars form in the present from clouds of dust and gas in space. This helps explain the formation of our sun by pure chance. So looking at a bit of the universe, there's a black bit, and suddenly they look at it, and then suddenly a star appears. And it looks like it appears from some dust. And they're like, wow, that star must have just formed. But there are some assumptions with this. Firstly, a lot of their measuring stuff, they assume the age of the star, which is known based on today's accepted ideas and millions of years of stellar evolution. They also assume a lot that the dust that they see as the star appears, surrounding the star, had a role in the star's formation. No one's actually been there. No one's actually seen it. They've just seen some dust and then a star. Bing. And they think that the dust made the star, but maybe the dust didn't make the star. And they also assume that there's another explanation. There is no other explanation for a star that we have not seen before suddenly become visible. But I think there are other explanations. For example, the star may have been hidden by the dust, and suddenly the dust moves, and there's the star. But because it's so far away, no one can actually check some of these very obvious things. And there are a lot of scientists, creation scientists, who have a lot of questions about these things. So there's another argument about the universe. Okay, so they say if the universe or even the stars are only 6,000 years old, then there would not be sufficient time for distant starlight to reach Earth. And some of the most distant stars that they can see that have shone light to the Earth are apparently 13 billion light years away. Okay, so they'll say, oh, a load of rubbish if you even can contemplate that. But again, we have some assumptions, don't we? That the speed of light has always been constant. And they talk a lot about the red shift. You guys deal with all this stuff probably in your science lessons. The red shift. It sounds very, very cool. I can't be bothered to read it all out, but basically when they look at light, they... well, actually, I better have just... because you guys probably haven't done this. So let me just try and read this out. This is from Bite Size. Our sun contains helium. We know this because there are black lines in the spectrum of the light from the sun, where helium has absorbed light. These lines form the absorption spectrum for helium. When we look at the spectrum of a distant star, the absorption spectrum is there, but the pattern of lines has moved toward the red end of the spectrum, as you can see below. So that's the measurement from our sun, and there's a pattern of lines. And they know that that's kind of absorption from helium. And then they look at a distant star, and it's got exactly the same pattern, but they've shifted the black lines, and they're now towards the red. And so they call that red shift. This is called red shift. It is a change in frequency of the position of the lines. Astronomers have found that the further from us a star is, the more its light is red shifted. This tells us that distant galaxies are moving away from us, and that the further a galaxy is, the faster it is moving away. Since we cannot assume that we have a special place in the universe, see what they say there? This is evidence for a generally expanding universe. It suggests that everything is moving away from everything else. The Big Bang Theory says that this expansion started billions of years ago with an explosion. So they use this red shift concept to say, well, everything was in one place and it all blew up and it's moving away from everything else. There are some assumptions because they don't know for sure what causes the red shift. They're assuming it's because of the stars moved away and the light that's coming back has done that. So it may go through stuff. They don't know for sure because no one's ever been out that far. And they assume that the light shifts at a constant rate as things are getting further and further away. So furthest away, the shift will be bigger than something nearer. But no one's ever been out that far. We're talking absolutely billions and billions of light years away. No one can actually get there. So we're just observing and making observations. And then there's Arp. I like that name, Arp. Holton Arp was an astrophysicist. Okay? He wrote this, or collected from the Hubble telescope, an atlas of peculiar galaxies, he called it, in 1966. And with this, he documented related quasars. These are like objects or light sources that are, really, really far away. which had different red shifts. Okay? But one of the weird things was that he found, okay, that there were two things out in far space, right, that were connected by this kind of little tail. And so they're obviously kind of together in an area of space. And yet, they both had different red shifts, right? And that's the sort of thing that he documented in his Atlas of Peculiar Galaxies. And so this John Gribben was reviewing this, and he said, if a galaxy and a quasar are physically connected but have different red shifts, something definitely is wrong. ARP has enough evidence that we ought to be worrying more people than actually acknowledge the significance of his findings. So what they're saying is they don't really know what's going on with this redshift stuff. It's just a way of trying to justify their religion of having a Big Bang billions and billions of years ago. Look at this. This is from New Scientist magazine. Why do distant galaxies seem to age at the same rate as those closer to us when Big Bang theory predicts that time should appear to slow down at greater distances from Earth? No one can yet answer this new question. Time waits for no quasar, even though it should. New Scientist. There are problems. And even if they did prove that everything was kind of stretching out over the universe, is that a problem for us? Does that prove evolution? Not for us, because we read in our Bible that God stretched out the heavens. And so, God is stretching the heavens out. There's not a problem for us, with that at all. So that's that one. I've got a few more. Is everybody all right to keep going? Okay, and then we're going to have some food.
With redshift,
Yep.
when they see something's moving away, and the frequency of the light changes. So the way that they explain redshift is it moves away, so the light wave is stretched out.
Yeah.
And that's why the frequency changes and they jump down the spectrum. We can actually see that happening on Earth. I can't remember the exact name of it. It's got a name, but it's the idea that imagine you're like a racetrack and F1 Doppler shift, Doppler effect.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the sound waves come towards you.
Yeah.
That bit is because as it goes past you, the waves change frequency, so the pitch of the sound changes, and that's what they use for the redshift.
Mm.
No, but they have words in there because they're both waves.
But as I've shown, there are problems with it.
There are problems,
and particularly, it's great. One thing's great observing something on Earth, but as soon as you take that into billions and billions of light years of vacuums and assumed vacuums and all sorts of things, you can't say that that's a fact. Yeah. You can say there is redshift there, but how you interpret that is up to you. But as I say, even if
they interpret it in the wrong way,
even if they interpret it correctly, okay, so everything's moving away from everything else. Fair enough. Fine. God stretched out the heavens. I've got no problem with that. So it's not really a major problem.
See the way you were saying that redshift is over.
Well, I didn't mean to say it was a load of rubbish. I was just saying that the conclusions that they make, that therefore that proves the Big Bang, that is a load of rubbish. And there are many assumptions that are made to conclude what they conclude. Anyway.
As well, like if the light comes through dust clouds.
Exactly.
Other frequencies are absorbed by the dust clouds, so it's not always...
It could be a problem.
It's not always the most accurate thing.
Anyway, as I say, I'm not a scientist, so there may be areas where you could look in a little bit deeper, and if anybody finds any other kind of evidences that they think they're struggling with, then I might not have the answer, but we could be sure to look into it and maybe go and find someone who does. So yeah, cool. This is another one. This is a massive one for the evolutionist. Okay, this is geology, earth sciences, stuff that's in the earth, rocks and stuff like that. So how are fossils formed? You have a dinosaur. Poor dinosaur dies. Ah. Dinosaur then rots. Ah. And his bones are left. Then, this is the point. Sedimentary rock, or sediment, surrounds the bones. Splash, like mud, basically. Encapsulates all the bones, okay? And then the mud goes hard, okay, over time.
Pressure.
And then what also happens then is that the actual bones themselves, they rot away, causing a little space to appear inside the other sediment. And then what happens is over time, other minerals go into that space, causing other rocks to form of the shape of the actual dinosaur bones. So I've got on the table here fossils. Now these are actually stone, but I think that's a fossil of some ancient, sea creatures. There's a fossilized shell there, tiny little baby shell. These are all creatures which have died in this way, and fossils have been made of themselves. This one actually isn't a fossil in the same way, because that is the actual shell of the actual creature. And so it would have become a rock fossil, but it's been pulled out before. I think that's, what do they call those? Ammonites. There you go. So that's an ammonite, and me and my mum and dad and my family, we dug those out, all of these out of the ground. I think we were down in near Dover, near some of the cliffs down there. And actually, I didn't realise, but it's very, very prominent. If you were going on holiday, like me and Ruth went to, and the boys went to Norfolk, and we just Googled Norfolk fossil finding, there's tons of places along the coasts of England that you can find fossils.
We went to Dorset.
Dorset.
Yeah.
There's loads in Lime Region.
So I'd absolutely like to go fossil hunting and find a Tyrannosaurus Rex. That would be so fantastic. But the point is fossils are everywhere, aren't they? Fossils are absolutely everywhere. So there must have been an awful lot of these things. And then what happens is the archaeologist digs down and, my word, he finds a dinosaur fossil. And so that's how fossils are formed, and that's how they come about. And then they shove them in a museum and everyone goes, oh, they were billions of years old. And how do they work out that they were billions of years ago? Well, they absolutely love this. This is called the geologic column. Okay? And what they say is if we were to cut down into the earth, we'll find all these little layers, and they've all got lovely, long, intelligent names. And in those layers, we'll find these very interesting fossils. And of course, they all say that some of the life, the simple life, starts at the very bottom, 500 billion years ago, until we get up to some more intelligent life as time goes on. This is what Henry Gee says in his book. No fossil is buried with its birth certificate. That and the scarcity of fossils means that it is effectively impossible to link fossils into chains of cause and effect in any valid way. To take a line of fossils and claim they represent a lineage is not a scientific hypothesis that can be tested, but an assertion that carries the same validity as a bedtime story. Amusing, perhaps even instructive, but not scientific. So what they do is they take various fossils and they try and put them into a line and say, well, that will evolve first, then that, and then that. But they have major problems with this. They can't hardly do it with anything. They do their best, but they can't. And what he's saying there is no fossil actually comes with a birth certificate. So these fossils on the table here, I bet they would tell us were billions and billions of years old. But they don't know that. They don't even know that this is... They might even say this is the ancient ancestor of a pig, right? But they don't know that. They don't know if this little snail thing had any offspring. It died, didn't it? This thing died. So how do they know that there was any offspring whatsoever? They don't.
Remember.
We'll come on to that in a minute. Just before we go on to that, let's go on to facts about the geological column, right? There is a fact that the actual column, right, was invented and kind of first brought about in England, right? They were digging the canals in England, and they found that when they dug a canal in the south of the country, there was a certain rock layers, and then they went to the middle of the country, and there was similar. And they're like, hey, it must be the same kind of bed of rock. And so they started to kind of document this. And they were creationists, the people that set this up. That's the important thing. They didn't think this was proof of evolution. It was 1816 when they first put it together. And initially it was created by observing specific layers. These later were labelled with the exciting names like Jurassic and stuff like this, and given billions of years of date. Bite size again, fossils of the simplest organisms are found in the oldest rocks, and fossils of more complex organisms in the newest rocks. This supports the theory of evolution, which states that simple life forms gradually evolved gradually evolved into more complex ones. Here are some problems with the geologic column theory. This is from the Creation Science Institute, right? Problems with the geologic column. Approximately 77% of the Earth's surface area on land and under the sea has 70% or more, of the strata systems missing beneath it. 94% of the Earth's surface has 3 or more systems missing. And an estimated 99.6% has at least one missing system of those rocks. Only a few of those rock layers. Only a few locations on Earth, 0.4% of its area, have been described with the succession of the 10 systems beneath. So what they're saying is all these different systems that they very carefully labelled and stuff, they only exist in a very few places, right? The rest of them are all jumbled up, and some only have 2 or 3 and other layers in between, and it gets very, very confusing. This is not a timeline. You can't really come to it and think it's a timeline. This is another guy, a geologist, John Woodmore-Rapp. He said 80 to 85% of Earth's land surface does not have even 3 geologic periods appearing in correct consecutive order. It becomes an overall exercise of gargantuan special pleading and imagination for the evolutionary uniformium paradigm to maintain that there ever were geologic periods. You can't prove anything with the geologic column. And one of the major proofs against this nonsense, that these layers built up over billions and billions and billions of years, is something called polystrat fossils. And these are fossils that go through various layers. And I love them. I'd love to get one and put it in my front room because I think they're fantastic. Polystrat fossil, a fossil of a single organism, such as a tree trunk that extends through more than one geologic stratum. So they found these. There's loads in America. This is in Nova Scotia. So you see all the layers. These layers are supposed to have taken billions and billions of years to collate and form into rock, and yet going through them all, there is a tree. And even a bit of tree root as well, there, going right down there. Yeah. And there's some more. These are all from the same sort of area in Nova Scotia, over the pond. And then we find some very interesting kinds of fossils. Check out this fossil, okay? This is a fish, you're absolutely right. 10 marks, top of the class. They're called coelacanth fossils, right, of this fish. And they were dated, and they found them in this stratum and of the geologic column, and they said, these date back to the Devonian period, 360 to 408 million years ago. Yes, boys and girls, this is a fish. And unfortunately, it became extinct, they said at the time, or maybe it evolved into something else. Great. Well, it didn't. Because they actually found one in 1938. They're massive, these things. They're absolutely huge. They're like a metre or so, a metre and a half across. They're really big fish. They found them really low down. So I think someone caught one. Can you imagine?
They're like, oh.
And check out this one. This is the sort of thing that you read of. So instead of thinking, well, hang on a second, right? This fossil is so many billions of years or millions of years old, and there's a one alive, and it hasn't changed in millions and millions of years. Instead of thinking maybe our theory is wrong, no, this is what they now say, these people in society. This is from the Independent. This is only from the other day, the 5th of July, okay? The living fossil coelacanth fish left behind by evolution. And this is one of the things I think is hilarious. They put that picture there, one of the few species to have hardly changed in tens of millions of years. Yes, it hasn't changed in tens of millions of years. Do you know why? Because evolution is not true. And therefore, it won't have changed. Isn't that interesting? Yet, for some reason, they won't rethink their theology. Why? Because we don't want to believe in God. We don't want to have to obey the rules. There are other, fossils don't necessarily have to take billions of years to form, or millions of years. There's plenty of evidence to show that fossils have formed around, rocks have formed around in sedimentary areas around the world. That's like, for example, a clock, that the rock was forming around the clock. So therefore, hard rock, can form quite quickly in the right conditions. And actually, fossils are all evidence, really, for rapid catastrophic burial. These are some of my favourites, right? Here's one here. The fish is having lunch, and suddenly the mud must have gone whoosh. And while the food is still in its mouth, it's now in rock, and it must have been like, what am I going to do now? And the other one was like, what's happened? And then they died together, which was, there you go, wouldn't like to be in then. Look at this one here, the wing of a dragonfly, okay? That has to have happened so quickly that the wing of a dragonfly was perfectly capsulated. This is a really cool one. This is a velociraptor fighting a Proteratops, and they were buried whilst in this fight. That is so cool. Now, the evolutionists say, a sand dune collapsed and caught them there. Well, yeah, fair enough. It was so sudden, it must have just been like, whash, you know. A lot of sand. These ones are really cool. Look, these are baby dinosaurs fossilised in their eggs. And look at this fish here. Look what's in its tummy. Lunch. So that didn't take billions of years of form, right? Because it would have its lunch would have been digested.
Matthew,
yes.
In the sense of like the circumstances required, and yet we have millions from all over the world, so that lends support to the fact that there was a worldwide catastrophic flood.
Yes.
You know, fossils don't just form like with anything.
Exactly. Exactly.
But it's not kind of related because it's kind of fossil.
Yes, no, it's a good point to make at this point, Auntie is making, that to get these types of fossils, right, you know, they're all over the world, as I've said, and in terms of, even in our country, you can go and dig up fossils like these. So why are there all these fossils? Why are there all these billions of creatures, right, that are covered? Well, that's the question. Were they? I mean, we would say yes from a flood point of view. The evolutionists would say no. It took billions of years. There were all these little sedimentary floods all over the earth for billions of years. That's amazing. That's real chance, that is. Let me just play you a video.
How they say that the fossils are like throughout the evolutionary tree, well, isn't like most of it missing apart from the bits at the end?
Exactly. Yeah.
Everything else in between.
There's no missing links, and we'll come on to missing links in a bit.
What's that tree rock?
Proselyte. I'll tell you later because it's recording, okay? So if you just bear with me, let's just watch this video because they believe that these things are so old because basically of dating methods.
Does radiometric dating prove the Earth is old?
Does the radioactive dating of rocks prove that the Earth is very old? Absolutely not. We need to understand how these methods work so we can find out the answer to that question. First of all, they're based on the occurrence of radioactive atoms of different elements in rocks. For example, some atoms of uranium decay to lead over time. Atoms of potassium, some atoms decay to argon. Rubidium decays to strontium. And we call them parent atoms decay to daughter atoms. Well, what most people don't realise is that there are three basic assumptions that are always used, and none of these assumptions are either testable or provable. Let's run through these assumptions. Number one, that we know the starting conditions. Well, the geologists assume that there are only parent atoms to begin with. Well, if there were some daughters, they think of ways to measure that and figure it out. But really, we don't know because we weren't there to know exactly what the starting conditions were. Number two, they have to assume that all the daughter atoms we measure today have been derived by radioactive decay of the parent atoms in the rock. But how do we know? What about contamination? What if groundwater flowed through the rocks in the past, adding or subtracting some of the parent or daughter atoms? So that's another problem. And the third assumption is that the rate of decay has always been constant. In other words, we measure how quickly uranium decays to lead today, potassium to argon, and then the geologists have assumed that that's the decay rate back into the past. So because uranium decays very slowly, they assume it's always decayed very slowly. Now, that again is not testable because we weren't there in the past to see whether the clocks have always ticked at the same rate. And geologists don't always admit to these problems and recognise them. Now, I was involved in a major research project and we found several lines of evidence that led us to the conclusion that the decay rates were much more rapid in the past, that they were accelerated, and therefore the clocks tick so much faster that the millions of years ages telescope right down to short young ages. And so, for example, we took rock samples from the same samples from the same rock layers and subjected them to several of the dating methods all at once. And we got different results for the different dating methods. Now, how could that be? Well, we discovered, as we did with several other lines of evidence, that the best explanation, indeed the only explanation, is that the decay rates were faster in the past. So that while the potassium-argon clock ticked through 516 million years, the rubidium-strontium clock ticked through 1111 million years. And so if the decay rate hasn't been constant in the past, that means the clocks are wrong, and therefore we can't trust these radioactive dating methods. But the interesting thing is, the methods still give the similar relative ages. In other words, rocks down the bottom of the geologic record give older ages than rocks at the top. And that's exactly what we'd expect during the flood. The rocks laid down early in the flood should give you older ages than the rocks at the top at the end of the flood. So whichever way we look at it, radioactive dating, while it's inaccurate, there may yet be a way of using it to confirm what we always knew from our starting point we have of God's Word.
So that was a geologist from Answers in Genesis, which is a very good website to bookmark at some point, because a lot of the questions that you might have, you can find on that site with an answer by somebody who's actually a scientist. So it doesn't prove anything. There's obviously problems with carbon-14 dating as well. I haven't gone into all of that stuff because I am not a scientist. Uncle Patrick Nelson did a good talk at our meeting, I think it was last year, all about the problems with that. Basically, they all assume various things: starting conditions, there's a constant decay rate, and the history of the actual thing itself. So there's other things that you can do. Some great arguments that they come up with. This is one, the ice layers argument. So they drill into the ice, they find all this stuff. And what they say is that, you see you've got these dark and light areas. They'll say that that's a year. So where you've got light, dark, that's 1 year, light, dark, another year, and so on and so forth. And so it's a fact that there are thousands of layers in ice. The evolutionists will say these are annual rings caused by snow melting, causing black line, and refreezing in winter snow packs causing the white line. But the creationists would say this does not represent years, just warm and cold, and these things could happen in 1 year, but we weren't there back in time. So the problem that we've got is that what happens is they add up all these lines and they come to hundreds of thousands. But there are assumptions that the accumulation rate of the ice has not varied greatly over the past, and that each dark and light layer does actually represent a year. But what about the lost squadron? Okay, this is what you want to say to these evolutionists. So what happened was, in the war, there were these American bombers, and they had to ditch in the Antarctic. Okay, and then later in 1990, so they ditched in 1942. In 1990, someone decided to go dig down and get these pristine condition bombs. Right? They ran out of fuel, had to ditch. So they dug down and they found them 263 feet under the ice. So the ice had accumulated in 48 years, 263 feet above them. Okay, and they had to dig through hundreds of layers of ice. So these light and dark ideas don't quite work, in terms of each layer being a year, because there were hundreds of them. In a telephone interview, Bob Cardin, he was one of the ones that dug it up, was asked how many layers of ice were above the recovered aeroplane. He responded by saying, there were many hundreds of layers of ice above the aeroplane. When told that each layer was supposed to represent 1 year of time, Bob said, that is impossible. Each of these layers is a different warm spell, warm, cold, warm, cold, warm, cold. In other words, it can happen frequently. And they were found under 263 feet of ice, which, as we say, accumulated in 48 years. This equals 5.5 feet per year. The Greenland ice sheet averages almost 4,000 feet thick. If we were to assume that the ice sheet had been accumulating at this rate since its beginning, it would take less than 1,000 years for it to form, and the recent creation model might seem to be vindicated. Adding calculations to equate for compression of ice over time, and then the ice sheet would be more about 6,000 years old at this rate. So actually, ice is a good evidence for creation. Here's another argument that they've got. And as I say, these are some of the best arguments, so I just want to mention a few of these things. They drill into trees, and they count how many rings are in the trees. It's called dendrochronology. And there are some facts about this. This is from Wikipedia. The record holders for individual non-clonal trees. Clonal is like where you've got a root system and then a tree pops up and then it dies, but the roots stay alive, and then another tree pops up and it just kind of grows like this all over the place. The record holders for this, for individual trees, may be the Great Basin bristletone pine trees from California and Nevada in the United States. Through tree ring cross-referencing, they have been shown to be around 5,000 years old. Right? They can date other ones with carbon-14, but we all know carbon-14 is a terrible dating method. So that's one of them. And, if you looked 5,000 years old, you'd probably look a bit like that. So they don't really have much against that, really, because, well, that actually fits with the creationist model. Considering that the immediate post-flood world would have been wetter with less contrasting seasons, many extra growth rings would have been produced in the bristletone pines, even though extra rings are not produced today because of the seasonal extremes. Taking this into account would bring the age of the oldest bristletone pine into the post-flood era. So there are explanations as to why some of these things might happen. There's some assumptions that these prove evolution, that the tree has always continued to grow at its constant rate, and that carbon-14 is accurate. But that's probably not the best argument that they could come up with, because I think this one's quite a strong argument, okay? That a clonal colony can survive for much longer than an individual tree. A colony of 47,000 quaking aspen trees, nicknamed Pando, covering 106 acres in the Fish Lake National Forest of the United States, is considered one of the oldest and largest organisms in the world. It's one organism. It covers 106 acres. The colony has been estimated to be, and the key word there is estimated, 80,000 years old. Although ring samples date individual above-ground trees at only an average of about 130 years.
So they're all one tree?
That's all one organism. Pando, the world's oldest organism. It's doing pretty well. But is it 80,000 years old? Because if it's 80,000 years old, then creation is wrong, and some other explanation must be brought around. Here's some evidence I've found against it, because they assume that, don't they? No one was there when no one planted the seed. So how do they estimate that size? Because they look at the growth it's making now, and then they calculate that backwards. But there's some problems with this. Given its size, it may also be very old, perhaps 80,000 years, but good dating of the time the original tiny seed germinated and established this clone lies beyond current scientific capabilities. Plausible estimates have been offered, ranging from several thousands, which would fit with creation, to 1 million years in age, although recent molecular work argues that these may be overestimates. So what they did was they looked at the molecular structure of this thing and thought, well, how long has it been in existence? Can we find out? And when they did this was from the report, they basically found that there wasn't actually much evidence to suggest it was so many billions of years old. But I'll leave that for someone to read later if you're interested. Basically, it's an estimation. They do not know, and it isn't that they've counted all the lines in the trees. They're estimating it based on the root system and the size of it and other varying factors. And they're trying to find the missing links, aren't they? I quite like that, doing websites. Benji, you'll recognise what that symbol means. Missing link, right? And I've got a book here called Bones of Contention. It's very interesting. It goes through all of the so-called missing links of all these different so-called men that are supposed to prove the chain from a monkey-type animal to a human. And they find these weird skulls and stuff like that. But to be honest, a lot of them have been exposed as frauds and as nonsense. The idea that one can go to the fossil record and expect to empirically recover an ancestor-descendant sequence, be it of species, genera, families, or whatever, has been and continues to be a pernicious illusion, says this very intelligent man, Gareth J. Nelson. And this is the last quote from the geology section. Lynn Margulis, she is a biologist and geoscience professor. What you'd like to see is a good case for gradual change from one species to another in the field, in the laboratory, or in the fossil record, and preferably in all three. Darwin's big mystery was why there was no record at all before a specific point. And then, all of a sudden, in the fossil record, you get nearly all the major types of animals. That's what you were talking about, Harry. The paleontologists Niles Eldredge and Stephen J. Gould studied lakes in East Africa and on Caribbean islands, looking for Darwin's gradual change from one species of trilobite or snail to another. What they found was lots of back and forth variations in the population, and then, whoop, a whole new species. There is no gradualism in the fossil record. So that's that one. I've got one final lot to do, and I'll do it very quickly as I can. So they believe everything came from soup. And this is what Darwin's book said. This is the first documentation of Darwin's tree. And look what he puts in the top left-hand corner. I think humanist. Not what God has told me. And they all believe they come from the common ancestor of soup. But again, the big question, boys and girls, how can you get life from non-life? They'll argue that there are things called vestigial organs, stuff in your bodies that you don't actually need. But all of the things actually have been found that you do need them, like tonsils protects against infection, the appendix protection against disease, the coccyx required for muscle structure, and we're going to the loo. Thyroid glands, essential to help early growth. All of the things that they've looked at in the past and said, I don't think we really need these, are useful. It doesn't mean they're essential, like you could cut your arm off. Is it vestigial? No, it's useful, but you can survive without it. And today, all organs formerly classed as vestigial are known to serve a function during the life of an organism. Now we just come on to a couple of other things that you will end up with. This is Alex from Alex's thing, the peppered moth. Peppered moths can be pale or dark. Now notice that. Peppered moths can be pale or dark. Pale peppered moths are easily camouflaged against the lichens on silver birch tree bark, but in areas of high pollen, the bark on silver or birch trees is discoloured by soot. In these areas, the rarer, darker speckled varieties of the peppered moth are more common than the pale varieties. This is because the pale peppered moths show up against the sooty bark, whereas the darker peppered moths are camouflaged, so they're able to survive and breed in greater numbers. It explains many observations in nature, like the peppered moth. This is natural selection. It has also been discussed and tested worldwide by many scientists. Although the theory of natural selection explains many observations, it doesn't prove the explanation correct. You're absolutely right there. So, how is that evolution? What did the moth turn into? The moth was a moth. So what they did was they looked at the supposed populations of white moths and black moths, and when they found there was loads of soot on the trees, surprise, surprise, the white moths were fewer. And they suddenly turn around and say, well, this is proof of evolution. It's not proof of evolution at all.
Two completely different species.
They're exactly the same species, just different varieties of the same species.
And apparently, actually, they don't even alight on bark, the actual species. So the whole thing is supposed to be an absolute joke anyway, if you actually look into it. It isn't actually a change in anything. It doesn't prove anything. Look at this one. This was another one. This is another one they've come up with loads. Resistant bacterias. And this is what the evolutionists say. Here's a favourite example of mine to show how witnessing evolution in action is possible. Antibiotic resistance. Scientists can observe how the frequencies of genes that make a microbe resistant to antibiotics increase when the environment changes to include an antibiotic. And in the book, it says some bacteria have become resistant to penicillin by natural selection as follows. The bacteria mutated. Some were resistant to the antibiotic penicillin, others were not. The non-resistant bacteria were more likely to be killed by the penicillin. The penicillin-resistant bacteria survived. The surviving bacteria reproduced, leading to more bacteria that is resistant to penicillin. This is why doctors are reluctant to prescribe antibiotics unless they're absolutely necessary. Yes, boys and girls, evolution. The bacteria is turning into bacteria. Now, that's good, isn't it? That's real evolution. Bacteria becomes bacteria. It's still bacteria. And what they don't tell you is that this so-called mutation in this small thing is actually a loss of information, not a gain. It's not like it's suddenly thought, oh, I must build a shell around me so that I am now resistant to bacteria. Let me just try and explain this. We read from James Perloff. For example, to destroy a bacterium, the antibiotic, I knew I'd get in trouble with some of these words, streptomycin, attaches to a part of the bacterial cell called ribosomes. So let's just make that absolutely clear. To destroy bacteria, the antibiotic has to attach to it using ribosomes. Mutations sometimes cause a structural deformity in ribosomes. Since the antibiotic cannot connect with the misshapen ribosome, the bacterium is resistant. But even though this mutation turns out to be beneficial, it still constitutes a loss of genetic information, not a gain. No evolution has taken place. The bacteria are not stronger. In fact, under normal conditions, with no antibiotic present, they are weaker with their non-mutated cousins. So this is how it works. There's a normal bacteria. We can send an antibiotic and it can latch into it because it's got the right thing to attach to. And then there's a mutated, damaged bacteria. And it's just damaged. So the antibiotic can't get to it. But fortunately for the bacteria that's damaged in this way, it becomes resistant to the antibiotic. But it's actually damaged. It's not actually very good. It's like, I heard one creation scientist explain it like this. Like, imagine you're in a traffic jam and the police stop you. And everybody gets out their cars and they're arresting everybody in this traffic jam. And there's a man there and he's got no arms. So they can't arrest him. So he goes free. Well, that's great. He's mutated to have no arms. So he can't be latched onto. But it doesn't mean it's a benefit to him in all circumstances. It just means in that one circumstance, it's a slight benefit to him. And that's the same with these so-called mutating, evolving. Good question.
With his mouth.
With his mouth. There you go. Thank you, Harry. There's always an explanation if you look hard enough. I just want to just to point out, I won't read this whole thing, but basically at the end it says, the main point, this is James Perloff again, the main point is that evolution cannot be achieved by mutations of this sort. No matter how many of them there are, evolution cannot be built on accumulating mutations that only degrade... there we go, yeah. There's another quote there. Throughout 150 years of science of bacteriology, there is no evidence that one species of bacteria has changed into another. Since there is no evidence for species change between the simplest forms of unicellular life, it is not surprising that there is no evidence for evolution from other bacterial life, let alone throughout the whole array of higher multicellular organisms. Now, I think this is another video.
Modern Darwinian theory, known as neo-Darwinism, is based on the idea that mutations in genes provide the raw material needed for evolution to work.
Darwin's theory requires a source of new variations. And in modern Darwinian theory, that source is genetic mutation. Well, we know genetic mutation can produce changes in proteins, protein molecules. This is what leads to some cases of antibiotic resistance in bacteria. But evolution involves a lot more than changes in protein molecules. It involves changes in entire organisms, shapes of organisms, what biologists call morphology.
One of the best-known examples of a mutation affecting morphology is the four-winged fruit fly.
In opening a biology text, one will often see a picture of a four-winged fruit fly. Now, as we know, ordinary fruit flies have only two wings. The four-winged fruit fly has not only its regular set of wings, but a second set of wings just next to that. And the caption or the text will say, this is evidence for the process of evolution, that mutations affect the process of development, and you can get anomalies as interesting as a four-winged fruit fly.
gene duplications and rearrangements of genes can indeed produce very sudden genetic changes. They can produce changes that are as dramatic as a fruit fly that suddenly has an extra pair of wings or has an antenna where its eye was supposed to be. And I give those as examples not of evolution, but of the ability of the genetic toolkit to produce very sudden and dramatic changes in an organism's morphology.
Well, it turns out that the four-winged fruit fly is actually a very poor example of Darwinian evolution, certainly.
There are no muscles attached to it, so the second set of wings is effectively dead. The fly is a hopeless cripple. It's kind of like having a small plane with an extra pair of wings tied to its tail. The fly can only survive in the laboratory, and it would be selected out by natural selection in the wild. So it's not a step forward in evolution. It's an evolutionary dead end. And it turns out that all morphological mutations that we know of are either have no effect on the organism at all, no fitness effect, or they're harmful. We don't know of any that are useful.
I think this creates a real paradox for evolution. If you're going to change animal form, you've got to do it in a way that the organism can survive and can pass on those new changes. We don't have examples of these kinds of large-scale changes. It's almost as if the fruit fly says, if you want me to exist at all, I better have 2 eyes, 6 legs, 2 wings, and so on. I better have more or less the normal form.
So I thought I'd put that in because the fruit flies is something that comes up from time to time again, these experiments. They didn't show anything beneficial. A couple of facts about mutations. They're very rare. They can produce random effects. They're not helpful. And not once has there ever been recorded an instance of a truly beneficial mutation of that extent. A couple of other quick things. Homology. This is where they look at various creatures and they look at patterns in the biological structure of different creatures. And then they'll say, oh, look, they must have come from a common ancestor. And then they try and work out some sort of tree back in time. And this is why I think this is quite scary. I mean, this is in your textbooks. You know, you've got to look at a whale, a dolphin, and a shark, and try and find out, you know, how they're structured in terms of evolutionary structure. This is the most scariest. Look at this. This is a test exam question from this textbook. And look at question number 2. Look at the section look at this section of an evolutionary tree shown below. A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Which species is the most recent common ancestor? Species F and species G. Would you expect species D to look more similar to species E than species F? Give a reason for your answer. 2 marks. Now, hang on a second. To answer this question, you have to enter and have learned their evolutionary thought process that everything comes from a common ancestor. You know, and I just think this is absolutely outrageous because this is just all theory anyway, but there's no evidence that these trees go back, you know, to the point what they're trying to teach, which is it all goes back to some soup. It may go back. You may have different species that come from 1 or 2 different ancestors, but that's it. Within a kind. You never get anything else. So let's just finish this section and then have some lunch. And while we're having lunch, we're going to watch one of those videos, okay? So we're going to come in here and watch some videos. So first of all, some unanswered questions. Where does matter come from? As you said, how can nothing explode and come into everything? Where do the laws come from? Where's gravity come from? Who made that up? Where did energy come from? No one can answer those questions with evolution. If everything came from the Big Bang, then why is the conservation of angular momentum not observed with moons and planets? What's that? That's where if you had something spinning and then you exploded it, everything would be spinning out of that central point in the same direction. You get moons spinning one way, other planets spinning other ways. You get whole galaxies spinning in different directions. So it doesn't actually make sense. And also, how did particles come together if they exploded in a vacuum from a single point? Because actually, if you explode them, they'll just all get further and further away. You're not going to get things kind of getting together and doing and combining. The spin of the Earth, how about some of these, is steadily slowing down. So why wouldn't it have stopped? And why has it not stopped now? And how could life have evolved billions of years ago? So the Earth's spinning at a steady rate, is constantly slowing down. Now that's fine if you go back in time; it would be speeding a little bit faster 6,000 years ago when creation happened. But if, in fact, it was billions of years ago, it'd be spinning so fast that basically everything would be vaporized. And that's the same sort of argument with magnetism. There's a magnet in the Earth in the North and South poles, right? That magnetism is weakening over time. It's fine, creation model, but in the evolutionist model, everything again would have just like zapped to the North or South pole and be vaporized. And also you've got the second law of thermodynamics, which is that everything tends towards disorder, not order. And so why doesn't that apply to the theory of evolution, Mr. Scientist Man? So you've got geology. Why are there shell fossils on the top of mountains? If it took billions of years for these things to go, why are they up the top like in Everest? Why are fossils found all over the world of creatures which must have been encapsulated in sedimentary rock instantly? Why are there petrified trees linking layers which were supposed to be billions of years old? Give us an answer. And I have actually read somewhere an evolutionist answer to that petrified tree thing was like, basically, well, that bit happened quick. Like, what? So the bit where the trees are, just that bit, that happened really quick. But when there's rock formations and other places, that had to take billions of years, really. So you've got geology. Oh, I haven't finished this one. Sorry, I meant to do some stuff. Basically, Niagara Falls is eroding a certain rate, and it's eroded down this kind of canyon a certain length down, and I haven't got that. It's basically, if it had been billions of years old, it would have evolved way back to Lake Erie on that rate. These clocks ticking. Again, coral reefs. If you calculate their current growth and then take it back in time, they can only be at most 3,000, 4,000 years old. And again, we've got no living thing older than 4,500 years, 5,000 years that tree was before that was measured. So why is that? Also, in terms of biology, why are there so many symbiotic relationships? There's so many species that need different species to coexist. So what did they all have to evolve together? That doesn't seem to be answered by evolution. And why are there so many biological systems which are irreducibly complex? And one of the videos I want to show you is this idea of irreducible complexity, that you've got a system that has a few different parts that all have to come together at exactly the right time for exactly one purpose. And each of those little things are no use on their own without coming together for that one process. Why are there so... hang on, there you go. That was the same slide. Why do we have a conscience? Right? Well, how does evolution explain that? Why do you feel bad if you punch someone in the nose? Well, I do anyway. Well, not that I've punched anyone in the nose, but you know what I mean. Why do you have an inherent conscience about things? How can we tell what's right from wrong if we don't have, the Bible to guide us? Why is man's oldest writings only 5,000 years old? Why haven't we got it going back any earlier? Why does current world population growth rates indicate human existence only goes back really to 4,000 or 5,000 years? And again, I'll end with this, the big unanswered question by evolution. How can you get life from non-life? So that's really the end of our consideration. They were the best arguments I could find for evolution. And as I say, there's explanations to them all. And really, when you actually get back to it, there's not really that much strong evidence, I would suggest to you, for this belief that everything came from soup 20 billion years ago. And what we're going to do in our sort of next session after lunch is we're going to get our Bibles out. We're going to look at what the Bible says about creation, and then we're going to look at how we might interpret that in terms of what it might mean to us. So thank you very much, and I'll close there.